Hi, folks. Thanks for being here. Welcome to this webinar about Mid-Atlantic Arts Folk and Traditional Arts grant programs. If we have not met before, my name is Ellie Dassler. I'm the Program Director for Folk and Traditional Arts at Mid-Atlantic. My pronouns are she and her. For anyone who's listening along today, I'm a young white woman with short, dark hair and bangs. I'm wearing a cream sweater and a yellow scarf. And I am speaking to you today from Richmond, Virginia, which is the unceded, traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Powhatan people, including the Rappahannock, Pamunkey, Chickahominy, and Mattaponi tribes. So I pay respect to their elders, past, present, and future. My colleague Joel Chapman is also here today. He's going to be helping us with Q&A and the tech things that I'm always really bad at. Joel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm Joel Chapman, Program Associate for Folk and Traditional Arts. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male with shoulder length blonde hair, speaking to you today from Baltimore, Maryland. Go Ravens, where the Mid-Atlantic Arts is headquartered, where Mid-Atlantic Arts is headquartered, and the unceded traditional lands of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples. And yep, as Ellie said, I'm not gonna be, she's gonna be doing most of the talking today. I'm just here to look pretty.
Speaking of looking pretty, there we are up on the screen. This is our contact information. We'll show this again at the end of the webinar, but if you have any questions or thoughts you want to share with us outside of the webinar setting, this is how you can get in touch with us. We will have a Q&A at the end of today's webinar. I hope you came armed with questions. If you would like to ask a question, you can type it into the Q&A box. There should be a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it right away, you may have to hit the three dots that say more and then go to Q&A. Zoom likes to sort of reorganize where its buttons are sometimes. We also have captioning enabled today, so if you would like to turn on the captions and read along, click again on that more button at the bottom of your screen and then select show captions. During this webinar, we're going to go over highlights from two of our grant programs, the Folk and Traditional Arts Community Projects grants and Central Appalachia Living Traditions Experiences grants. You can see the full guidelines for both programs on our website as a PDF or as a Word file that is compatible with screen readers. If you have other questions about accessibility and these grant programs and you want to request accommodations, please get in touch with us at least 10 days before the program due date, which is March 10th, 2025. So this is our agenda for today's webinar. Like I mentioned before, we'll go over the guidelines for two of our programs, and then we will have time for a Q&A at the end. But you can type your questions anytime you want into that Q&A box or into the chat. You don't have to wait until the end. So if you get to a slide and you think of a question, feel free to jot it down. You don't have to remember what it was. First, I want to share a little bit about Mid-Atlantic Arts for anyone who's maybe not as familiar with us. Mid-Atlantic is one of 6 regional arts organizations in the US. We serve 10 member states and territories, including Delaware, DC, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Virginia, and West Virginia. We're part of this national arts service ecosystem that includes local arts agencies, state arts agencies, regional arts organizations like us, and the National Endowment for the Arts. This is our organization mission. Mid-Atlantic Arts nurtures and funds the creation and presentation of diverse artistic expression and connects people to meaningful arts experiences within our region and beyond. Mid-Atlantic distinguishes itself through our work in international cultural exchange, performing arts touring, the jazz field, and our favorite, support for folk and traditional arts. So what are the folk and traditional arts? This will likely not be news to some of you, but it's always good to have a refresher. We define folk and traditional arts as the art of everyday life, including expressive practices that are based in and reflective of the knowledge, beliefs, values, and aesthetics of cultural communities, including families, geographic communities, occupational groups, ethnic heritage groups, and much more. Folk arts are often learned orally or by observation and imitation rather than in institutional settings. All traditions are deeply connected to their histories, but they're also constantly evolving and adapting to a changing environment. New traditions are being created every day. For the purposes of these programs, folk and traditional arts include crafts, foodways, dance, music, storytelling, and honestly, much more. This is, you can look at on your screen for an example. You may look at this picture and see a basket, and you would be right. That's an example of folk art or folklore, sort of in and of itself. But if we think about the cultural context of this object, we know that it's specifically a white oak basket from a part of South Central Kentucky called the Cub Run locality. We can learn other things like what it's made from, how to make it, who made it, where they came from, what context they would use it, the role it might play in their identity, and more. And these are all dimensions of what we call folklore. Folklorists have been sort of arguing over how to define folklore for like 130 years. We probably will never totally agree, and I actually think that that's a strength. Like folk and traditional arts themselves, the term remains flexible and comprehensive, a comprehensive way to look at these homegrown art forms that are used for expression, communication, and so much more. So we have two traditional arts grant programs that are open now, and they're very similar, but they have a few key differences. Hopefully you're here today because you realized you could be eligible for one or both of these programs, and you want to learn more about what might be the best fit for you. So we're going to look at an overview of each program. First, we have our Folk and Traditional Arts Community Projects grants. These fund projects that support the vitality of traditional arts and cultural communities in the entire Mid-Atlantic Arts region. Nonprofit organizations, units of government, and federally recognized tribal governments can apply to fund projects that feature folk and traditional artists in their communities. Today, I'll call this program sometimes just Community Projects Grants because Folk and Traditional Arts Community Projects is a little bit of a mouthful. These grants are funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. The other grant program we'll go over today is called Central Appalachia Living Traditions Experiences. It's part of Mid-Atlantic's larger Central Appalachia Living Traditions, or CALT, initiative. CALT promotes the understanding and recognition of folk arts and culture in Appalachia through a variety of different programs, including the CALT Experiences grant that we're talking about today. CALT serves the counties of Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia that are designated by the Appalachian Regional Commission, or ARC. You can find a full list of those ARC counties on our website in the program guidelines for CALT experiences. Please note that Ohio is not technically a part of Mid-Atlantic Arts region. That's those 10 states and jurisdictions that I listed earlier. But Appalachian Ohio counties are included in the CALT region. We sort of borrow Appalachian Ohio from our sister regional Arts Midwest, specifically for the CALT program. CALT Experiences grants fund projects and events in those ARC counties in Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia that bring community members together around traditional arts practice and cultural knowledge. And funding for CALT Experiences comes from private sources, in contrast to community projects, which, like I said, is funded by the NEA. So both community projects and CALT Experiences grants can fund similar types of activities. They both support those programs and events that highlight folk and traditional arts within a community, including hands-on learning experiences like workshops, trainings, and demonstrations of traditional art, public folk art projects, exhibits, performances and festivals, media production and broadcast, including film, radio, or podcasts, and fieldwork documentation and archival work. For both programs, there must be some publicly accessible component to your project. For some projects, this will be obvious. For example, a performance of traditional dance has an audience. That audience could be open to the general public, or it could be geared towards a smaller subset of your community, like K through 12 students, deaf and hard of hearing folks, or other musicians. Kind of depends on your goals. But for other types of projects, that public component may need some more thought. For example, if you want to apply to support a fieldwork project, you should be able to explain your plans for those fieldwork materials. If you do interviews, you collect film footage, you should include in your application a plan for how you will share that material with your community. So it could be made available in an accessible digital archive. You could plan a documentary film screening event, or you could use the audio interviews as part of a podcast series that's available to stream. These are just a few examples of projects that could work for either a community projects grant or a CALT experiences grant, but there are many more possibilities. So always feel free to reach out if you want to discuss your ideas and confirm whether they would be eligible for one of these grants. So let's say you have a great idea for a project, you want to apply for funding. Which program should you go for? Some of the primary differences between these two programs have to do with their eligibility requirements. So all applicants for folk and traditional arts community projects grants must be organizations. Individual artists cannot apply for community projects. Specifically, your organization must be a 501c3 nonprofit, a unit of state or local government, or a federally recognized tribal government. You must also be located within Mid-Atlantic Art's normal 10-state region. So that was Delaware, DC, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Virginia, and West Virginia. So this means that our Ohio friends are not eligible for community projects grants. On the other hand, CALT experiences grants, organizations and individual folk and traditional artists and practitioners can apply. So all of those same kinds of organizations, nonprofits, state, local governments, tribal governments, and individual artists can apply for CALT experiences. For CALT experiences, you must live or be based in an ARC designated county in Ohio, Virginia, or West Virginia. So if you are in Ohio or you're an individual artist, CALT experiences is the grant for you. If you represent a nonprofit or a government entity in Appalachian, Virginia, or in West Virginia, you could apply to either or both of these programs. If that is you, you actually can apply to both programs in the same year, but you can only receive one. And I will explain more about what that means and what that process looks like a little bit later. I'll also say just quickly, if you've received either of these grants in the past, you are eligible to apply again. In fact, we hope that you do. We love to see it. You just need to be in good standing with Mid-Atlantic Arts and have no overdue final reports or grant documents from past grant cycles, either for these programs or any of our other programs outside the folk and traditional arts space. Another key difference between these two grant programs is the available grant request amount. So for community projects grants, you can request between $1,000 and $7,000 for your project. Importantly, community projects grants also have to be matched on a one-to-one basis. This means you must have additional funding for your project from a different source that is at least equal to the amount of your grant request. This is a little more a match requirement and an example. Your match requirement, your match could include grants from a state or a local agency, private donations, or ticket sales, but it cannot include federal funds. And the grant and the required match can also not be used to match any other federal funds. Remember I said that community projects was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. These are rules that come along with NEA funding that apply to all of to everything that the NEA supports. You'll need to identify your anticipated sources for this match in the budget of your the budget section of your application if you apply for community projects. The match also has to be what we call cash, which means it has to be actual funding. In-kind donations like volunteer time, donated space, or donated food don't count to satisfy the match requirement. And I know match requirements can be complicated. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to figure out how you could satisfy this requirement. CALT experiences, however, do not have a match requirement, and those grants are available between $1,000 and $10,000. And the fact that there is no match requirement means that you don't have to secure funding from anywhere else. CALT experiences could be your only funding source for your project. Depending on the project you have in mind and how much funding you need, this could impact your choice of application. For example, let's say you're planning a big festival, you already have some state and private donor funding lined up. But you really want to include one more traditional artist. You're over budget, you need $3,000 for their artist fees. Community projects grants could be a good fit for you. You already have other funding that you could use for the match requirement, and a community projects grant could give you that extra funding you need to include this artist and really enhance the traditional arts content of your festival. On the other hand, if you are putting together a series of traditional craft workshops, a brand new program, you have no funding lined up yet, you might want to take advantage of CALT Experience's larger available request amount and the lack of a match requirement. For both grants, though, the amount you request does not impact how likely you are to receive a grant. So no matter which one you apply for, you should just request whatever makes sense for your project. Funding awarded through either program must be spent on specific direct costs related to your approved project. You cannot use it for indirect costs related to like the general operations of your organization. You'll specify those direct costs in the budget section of your application. Some examples of direct costs can include artist fees, artist travel and lodging expenses, program staff salary, so for folks who are working directly on the approved project, marketing and promotion expenses, supplies and equipment, and expenses related to public health measures for in-person activities. And if you have any questions about whether an expense is eligible, again, just hit us up. So you've made it this far. You and your project meet the requirements. You know which program you're going for. It's time to apply. To access the application, you'll visit midatlanticarts.smartsimple.com. They're in the pink on the screen. Smart Simple is just the name of the grant platform we use to collect applications and award our grants. If you've applied for a grant from Mid-Atlantic before, you already have an account, so you will log in using your existing Smart Simple account. If you have never submitted a grant to Mid-Atlantic, you'll need to create an account. You'll click on that purple register button at the bottom of the login screen. You'll see over there on the bottom left. You'll select which applicant type fits you, such as registered nonprofit organization or individual artist. Then you'll fill out some basic personal information. You'll submit your registration. You will receive an email with a link to activate your account and receive or create a new password. And then once you log in, you'll see your dashboard. You'll click on a big button that says funding opportunities, find the application you want to pursue, and you can get started. The applications for community projects and CALT experiences are similar. They follow basically the same format. They each include these sections. So applicant information, project details, which is like the dates of your project and the type of project, your project narrative, that's really the meat of the application, your budget, and work samples. The project narrative, I said that that's sort of the most important part of the application. The narratives for these two programs have slightly different questions. They're each tailored to the program's kind of target applicant and goals. This is a preview of the narrative questions for each program and the differences between them. You can view these questions in more detail in the guidelines for either program available on our website that I mentioned earlier. And for both programs, we have a diverse group of folk and traditional arts specialists who review and score the applications and give feedback. That means Mid-Atlantic Arts staff, me and Joel, do not make decisions about who receives the grants, which is how we like it because it means we can advise you about your applications and it's not a conflict of interest. Community projects and CALT experiences also have two totally separate review panels. So if you are eligible for them both and you choose to apply for them both, the panelists for community projects won't even know that you applied for CALT experiences, and that won't affect their review of your application at all. In fact, the only thing that affects their review are these review criteria that you see on the screen. The criteria for both programs, again, are similar, but there are a few key differences. You'll see here that accessibility and budget are their own criteria for the community projects program. So your responses to those things will be extra important to get a good score. For CALT experiences, reviewers still consider accessibility and they still consider your budget, but they're sort of folded into these other criteria and they're weighted a little bit less. Instead, there's a criterion specifically for how well your project fits CALT's goals of expanding awareness, understanding, and appreciation of living traditions in Appalachia. Again, the complete review criteria for both programs are available in the guidelines. No matter which program you choose to apply for, you should make sure you understand these criteria really well. This is what reviewers respond to when they score your application. So make sure you're addressing each criterion somewhere in the application. And again, please reach out if you have questions about how to make sure you're doing that. This is a little more about what the process looks like after you submit your application. So first, Mid-Atlantic Arts staff, me and Joel, will review your application for any eligibility concerns. If we see anything that concerns us, we'll reach out to you. Then the applications are sent to our panelists who evaluate them against those program criteria we just went over. The panelists have a meeting, they talk about the applications, they make grant recommendations, and then we send those recommendations to the Mid-Atlantic Arts Board of Directors for final approval. I mentioned earlier that if you were eligible, you could apply for both community projects and CALT experiences, but you can't receive them both in the same year. So that means that if you apply for them both, the review process is happening concurrently. If you score high enough to be among the recommended grants for both programs, let's say you get an average score of 90 in community projects grants and you have an average score of 85 in CALT experiences, those both put you into the recommended grant pool. The higher scoring application is what will stay in the running. So in this case, you'd be a recommended grantee for community projects grants. That's the grant you would receive. And the lower scoring application will be withdrawn to make room for other high scoring applicants in the CALT Experiences program to receive that funding. Both of these programs are quite competitive. There's always lots of folks who submit great applications and get high scores that we're not able to fund. So we want to make sure we can basically spread the funding around as much as possible. That's why we're doing it this way. That's why you can only receive one in the same year. All of that, with one of them being withdrawn from consideration, that will all happen behind the scenes. You'll just find out about it when you get notified that you received one of the grants. And if you are given a grant, you will have some paperwork to fill out to make it official, and then the grant funding will be paid out. It is a 100% upfront payment. After your project is over, you have to complete a final report telling us how it went. You'll find the final report in Smart Simple, which is the same place you completed the application. And that final report is due 30 days after your project ends. That's true for both grant programs. The final reports require some narrative reflection. You have to submit photos or documentation of the funded activities, and you give us a breakdown of your final budget. For community projects grants that have that one-to-one match requirement, your final budget also needs to include proof of what your required match was. We don't, however, require receipts. We don't require grant documents from other funders, just a submitted budget that says where the funding came from and what all of your direct expenses were. The good news is that you only have to remember one set of dates for both of these programs. They're both due March 10th, 2025 at midnight Eastern time. Unfortunately, we cannot accept late applications, so please make sure you give yourself plenty of time to plan, log into the system, time for if any technical issues come up, to ask us questions, and to submit. If you submit at 12:02 a.m. March 11th, we can't accept that application. So please plan ahead. We will notify you about the status of your application, so whether you received funding or not, by June 20th. And if you receive funding, your projects have to take place between July 1st of this year and June 30th, 2026. This is what we call the grant project period. And then, like I mentioned before, your final report will be due by July 30th, 2026 at the latest. That's 30 days after your project ends. And that's also the same for both programs. Because these two programs are open at the same time, when you log into Smart Simple to complete your application, make sure you have the right one. We don't want anyone accidentally applying for a grant program that they didn't want to apply for. And that is all I have to say today. Thank you so much for being here. I really hope this was helpful. What questions do you have? You can type your questions using the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. While you are typing your questions, I will put our contact information back up here on the screen. I also will briefly plug to sign up for the Mid-Atlantic Arts newsletter and to follow us on social media if you don't already. You can just go to our website to do either of those things. No spam promised. It's all just news about new folk and traditional arts programs, including one that we launched today. We've been busy. So please tune into newsletter or social media if you want to hear about what else we have going on. And for now, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the questions better. Do we have any questions yet?
We have one question, and you kind of already answered it earlier, but not sure if this person was here for that or not. So they asked, I'm based in Scioto County, Ohio. Are we here in Southern Ohio not capable of taking advantage of any of these grants? I thought these grants were meant to fund projects in Central Appalachia.
Hi, yeah, good question. So if you are in an Appalachian County in Ohio, you are eligible for the CALT Experiences Grant Program. So you're not eligible for folk and traditional arts community projects, but you are eligible for CALT Experiences. I don't know all of the eligible counties off the top of my head, so check the list in the guidelines to make sure that your county is eligible. And also, if you live in a border county and you want to talk about whether you would be eligible, please just ask us. It says this in the guidelines, we are able to make exceptions sometimes for folks who live on the border and are pursuing activities that are based in ARC designated counties. So just reach out to us if you have questions about your geographic eligibility. But Ohioans are eligible for CALT experiences, and we hope you'll apply. We always need more applications from Ohio.
Yes, Scioto County is an ARC county, so you are eligible.
Thank you
Right
for
on the
checking.
Portsmouth, right on the Ohio River, bordering West Virginia.
Joel knows his Ohio geography a lot better than I do. Thank you.
Someone asked, can you talk about the nuances of the different objectives of the two programs? Community projects equaling entire Mid-Atlantic region versus CALT, bringing communities together around folk and traditional practices. So the goals.
That's a good question, Carrie. And you'll notice that in the descriptions for those, we sort of use a lot of synonyms. Both programs are meant to basically increase the accessibility and availability of high quality arts programs for folk and traditional arts specifically. Bringing people together around folk and traditional arts, opportunities for people to engage with folk and traditional arts. That is the primary goal of them both. Where they really differ, and this is where that CALT goals question in the CALT experiences application comes in, is their geographic focus. So the CALT experiences program, the goal is specifically to do that in Appalachia around Appalachian traditions, which is, any tradition that's taking place in Appalachia, that lives in Appalachia, people who live in Appalachia. But that geographic component is a significant part of CALT's goals, and something that I would recommend you emphasize in your application for CALT experiences. How is your program engaging with diverse Appalachian identities, Appalachian traditions, history and contemporary life in Appalachia, that kind of thing. The Folk and Traditional Arts Community Projects grants, although we have funded Appalachia focused programs through that program before, and we are happy to do it again. That's just not a specific goal of the program. It is broader and sort of related to just generally bringing people together around folk and traditional arts anywhere in our region. It doesn't have that same geographic focus. So it is nuanced, but it's mainly the geographic piece that distinguishes their goals. I hope that makes sense. The geography is about what you present versus your marketing effort, i.e. who you're seeking to participate in your activity. It could be both. I would say, again, if you are based in Appalachia and you're doing something for an Appalachian audience with Appalachian traditions, that's sort of a given by the fact that you are based in Appalachia. You would be doing both of those things. But if you were I'm trying to think of an example where you wouldn't be eligible for both of them, or you wouldn't be a good fit for both of them. Um, let's say your project was focused mainly on bringing an artist from outside of the region to perform inside of the region. So not an Appalachian artist, but for an Appalachian audience, that might be a better fit for a community projects grant versus CALT experiences. Whereas if it's sort of an intra-community or inter-Appalachian community audience, inter-Appalachian community presentation, that may be a better fit for CALT experiences. And again, that's all something we can talk about one-on-one if you're trying to decide which program to pursue. It can be nuanced. Um, and again, if you're eligible for both, you could apply for both. Good question, though. Any other questions? If not, that's okay. We can just give you some of your afternoon back. But I do hope you'll take advantage of calling up Joel and I to talk about your application. We always joke that we have, it's not even a joke, it's serious, that we have a goal of talking to all of the applicants before they submit. And we have not hit that goal yet, but someday I hope we will, and maybe it will be this year. So if you're planning to apply, give us a call, send us an email.
I don't joke around when it comes to folk and traditional grants.
Never. Very serious. Um, thank you so much for being here today. Stay warm, stay safe, and we hope to hear from you soon.